Remember Occupy Wall Street? Well, one of the men who started the movement is out with a new book called The End of Protest. Micah White joins us now to tell us how activism is actually broken, but what to expect now. Thanks so much for joining us. So it's interesting, you're an American, but you started the whole Occupy Wall Street movement with the help from a Vancouver-based magazine, Adbusters.
That's right, that's right. Actually, I think that's something that's so fascinating that Canadians don't really know is that Occupy Wall Street, which is one of the greatest social movements in American history, came from Canada. And also my book is from a Canadian publisher. So there is something, Canada plays this interesting role where it's actually exporting social change into America. It's kind of a beautiful thing.
Right, and the movement spread, and it lasted for so long. It spread to, became Occupy Tokyo, Occupy Toronto. There were but yet you explain in the book how it failed. It just didn't do what you'd hoped it would.
Right, right. You know, Occupy spread to 82 countries, over 1,000 encampments. And so, you know, I think Occupy was a constructive failure. We achieved the storyline of what activism has been chasing for so long, a social movement that reaches millions of people. And I think the core idea that we've come to understand is that activism and protest as we know it is broken. What we need to do is kind of reinvent activism, reinvent protest.
Right, and you explain in the book, it's because people just keep going back to the same, well, we're going to have a rally or we're going to have a march. But often the meaning of that is kind of very undefined, right? And that's where you explain that that's where you end up not getting the results that you want.
Well, I think it's, activism requires constant innovation, and a great tactic only works once. And so when activists repeat the same behaviors over and over again, it just becomes part of the script, the political spectacle.
Right.
And protest, when we just kind of use the same tactics, it just doesn't work. And so the thing about Occupy is that we created a new tactic, and that's why it spread.
Right.
But then it became something that we repeated. So you're in this constant kind of innovative dance.
Right. And the new tactic was that it didn't have a clearly defined leader. Like everyone spoke, kind of thing.
Right. Part of it was the leaderlessness, and part of it was the idea of holding these general assemblies in the public squares and kind of using consensus-based decision making. And those tactics we got from Egypt and Spain, and we kind of combined them into America. So social movements are created from a contagious mood and a new tactic.
Right. Speaking of Egypt, of course, the Arab Spring. Wow, that was a movement that did work. But it had very clear defined goals.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough though. I mean, there's a common narrative within activism that what we need is clearly defined goals. And there's counterexamples though, like the February 15, 2003 anti-war march that also was worldwide in every country, and people said no to the war, but it didn't stop the war.
Right.
So clearly defined goals alone is also not sufficient. What I think we need to do is have activism start to understand the goal should be to gain power. I think that's really what is kind of what's lacking right now.
I find it interesting that you say in the book that women are going to be at the forefront of the next revolution that does work. Why do you think that?
Well, I think that the thing about revolution that's so interesting is that it always comes as a surprise. And people didn't expect Occupy Wall Street, they didn't expect the Russian Revolution. And so when I kind of look towards the future and I check in with my revolutionary intuition, it seems to me that we could very easily see a kind of women's social movement that suddenly erupts, much like Occupy, where we wake up one day and there's suddenly women of all generations in the streets protesting against the kind of injustice that is, I think, the daily oppression of being a woman in our society. And it could spread globally too, because of the global solidarity of women and all this kind of stuff. So it's just one of these kind of revolutionary scenarios that I see.
But how do they make it work if the old ways haven't worked?
I think the core thing is that so you need a willing historical moment, time has to be right. You need a contagious mood, which I think is one of losing one's fear.
Right.
And you need a new tactic. So we would have to have some sort of...
And often an act of surprise, right?
And it has to come as a surprise. And you have to keep your eye on the goal, which is ultimately a women's social movement should be fighting to get gender parity or equal political power, if not greater political power. Women need to kind of step forward and say, you know what, it's time for us to basically, maybe we should be in charge now of the world, and maybe we could solve climate change because we're more collaborative or whatever it is, And so I think that we could see a kind of women's social movement that kind of really goes for power.
We've run out of time, but End of Protest, a new playbook for revolution, is out now. Micah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.